Hey everybody, Troy here, and this video is part of my series on local area network management fundamentals. We're going to look at one of the cornerstones of LAN management, our friend DNS, Domain Name System. We're going to be installing a standalone DNS server in Windows Server 2022. We'll configure the primary, forward, and reverse lookup zones for both IPv4 and IPv6 so we can resolve DNS queries from a Windows 10 client. Let's get this done. All right, as always, we're going to go step by step through this deployment. The timestamps for each section are listed in the description of the video below. Feel free to jump to the section you're looking for or walk with me step by step through this deployment as we set this up. Okay, let's kick off with my network infrastructure. As you can see from the diagram, I'm running two virtual machines connected with a Hyper-V private switch. That means that these machines are addressed individually and specifically isolated from my host operating system. I'm running two virtual machines. The first one is a installation of Windows Server 2022, and the second is a client PC running an installation of Windows 10 Professional. You can see that I'm going to be installing a standalone DNS role, and the addressing is listed for both of these machines in the diagram ahead of you. Now, I will stress this is a standalone DNS installation. There is no Active Directory involved. There will be a video coming up in the series deploying Active Directory with DNS, and when that video is ready, it's going to show up in the description in the link below. Now, with respect to core configuration on these machines, the only thing that I've done is name the machine according to my topology and assign an IPv4 and an IPv6 address and confirm connectivity. Aside from that, we'll be doing everything else in the video. Let's take a look at my machines. There's my Hyper-V manager running in the background. Let's take a quick look at our DNS bacon machine. So we are trying to build the authoritative source for bacon.com. Bacon, everybody loves bacon. Let's start off in our server manager and we will install the DNS role. I'm going to get rid of that pop-up here. I'm going to start with my add roles and features option, and this will lead me into the wizard where I add the requisite role for DNS. Now the wizard gives me a few suggested pre-deployment configurations. I should have an administrator account with a strong password. I should have a statically assigned IP address. I should have run Windows Update to ensure my patches and security updates are run. However, this is just a lab environment, so I'm not too concerned about that. I'm going to click on the role-based installation, and you'll see I'm going to verify that I do have that valid IP address. If I saw a 169.254, or otherwise known as an APIPA, or an auto-provisioned IP address, I would stop, exit the wizard. I'd go back and confirm those network settings because that static address is going to be very important for the records that are set up during this process. Everything looks good though. I'm going to flip ahead and select the DNS role, including the management tools in the DNS server tools that come with. Hit yes, next. I have no additional features that I want to add. I'm going to hit next, and away I go. Now, there's an option here that will let me restart the server automatically if required, and this is deliberately set because if this were a production environment machine, I don't want to perform an installation that's going to reboot a production machine without my preparation. So by default, it will not turn off without your knowledge. That is unchecked. I'm just going to now install the tools. You'll see it's going to start this installation. It'll just take a second. I'll pause the video and fast forward. And we're back. So you can see my installation is completed. And before I click close, I do want to show you this section right here. Export configuration settings. This is a handy little tool inside the wizard that allows me to export the configuration that I just set up so it could be subsequently run in different installations using PowerShell. We'll try to get to that in another video as well. But I'm going to hit close and you'll see that a few of the services here have popped up. I'm not going to worry about those for a second because I want to point to you on the left-hand side. There is now a DNS tool ready here. I can click here and you'll see that now my server is recognizing the DNS role. Now what I want to do is pop in and do some configuration. Let's go under the tools option and I'll see that I have a snap-in for domain name system. There we go. I'm now looking at my DNS manager, and as I click on my server, which is the DNS Bacon is the name of my machine, you can see that I can expand here the tree on the left. Now you'll see that I have no zones added. So this simply installed the role of DNS. I haven't made it the authoritative source for anything yet. Now, it is going to be the authoritative source for the namespace called bacon.com. So I'm going to use the tools embedded in the DNS management snap-in to set that up. So now one of the primary jobs of DNS is to resolve queries. It's a translator, it's a database, it's a library of records. Those records provide all sorts of information to clients. One of the most common requests is translating or resolving a name of a machine or a host or an object on our network with its corresponding IP address. We call that a forward lookup. I want to look up the name of something and find out the IP address. I'm going to do that by creating a forward lookup zone. I'm going to right click, select new zone. Up comes a wizard that's going to walk me through the creation. I hit next. I get a series of options for the zone. I can create a primary zone, which is going to make this zone the authoritative source of all the records inside it. I could create a secondary zone, which is a copy of a zone transferred from another server. I'll be doing that in another video. Finally, there's a third option called a stub zone, which is a smaller subsection of a secondary zone where it only brings over a subset of records. What I'm going to do in this video is a primary zone, and I have to create the zone name. Now, this is my DNS namespace. Now, I've established in the beginning that this namespace is going to be bacon.com. This is the bounded or the DNS namespace for this particular environment. Let's hit next. And it's going to create a file to hold these records called bacon.com.dns. I'll hit next again, and now I get some options associated with how the records are going to be put in this zone. You can see that it can be updated dynamically, which means these records could propagate and be built as DNS queries come in. Now, this is a standalone server. I'm not going to allow those dynamic updates, which means for the purposes of this lab, I have to do them manually. I'm going to hit next, and I get a summary screen that completes the construction of this zone. Now, let's take a look now at my new folder. You can see that 2 records have been built. The first one is something called a start of authority, an SOA record. I can right click, take a look at the properties, and you can see that I have several tabs that tell me about the creation and the properties of this record. The name server is not yet set. Now I want this machine to be a name server, so I'm going to validate this name. I'm going to select the edit button, and it gives me a chance to create a connection to a name server. Well, let's resolve this and see what it's found. Now, it correctly found that this is a valid name server for the DNS zone, both on an IPv4 and IPv6 basis. So that resolution was fairly important because that clarified the record. I'm going to hit apply and close that. Now let's take a look at this record here, this name server. If I go to properties again, I'm actually in the same place. What I'm seeing here is the same options that I had before. There's my start of authority. That's the name server tab that I was just on a second ago. Again, I can edit and validate that these records are fully resolved for this environment, which means that these 2 addresses are going to serve as a name server and provide resolutions of queries that come their way. Let's click OK. I'm going to click apply. I'm going to click close. Now, notice there are no other records here. The reason is because we selected when we created this zone, these records are not to be dynamically updated. There are no records here that'll appear unless we manually create them. The first thing we should do is set up a record for this server. What I want to do is be able to create something we call a glue record or a host record, or formerly an A record, that will let other machines identify the name of this particular machine. Now, our machine name here, if I go under my system options here, you see that the name of this machine is, DNS Bacon. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an A record for that. New host, A record, DNS-bacon. So this is the server. Now see what's happened here. It is now created something called the fully qualified domain name. So the bacon.com namespace has a machine in it, a computer, a server in this case, called DNS Bacon. The fully qualified domain name of that machine is dnsbacon.bacon.com, and the IP address is going to match the topology that I set, 192.168.0.1. Now that's already been set in my network TCP/IP settings. I'm just going to type them in here, 192.168, oh, we get to type that properly, 0.1. And now I have an option to create this thing that's called an associated pointer record. Now a PTR, or a pointer record, that's for reverse lookups. That lets me translate IP addresses to the name. Now I haven't actually created a reverse zone where these records live. So even if I clicked to create one, it can't create one because the zone that this record lives in doesn't exist yet. We'll fix that. Let's hit add host and done. And now you can see here that we now have an A record here. Let's do some validation, some verification. I'm going to go to my command line and I'm going to do an IP config, and I'm just going to verify what you should be seeing here. On this machine, I set up the TCP/IP settings to include the address of 192.168.0.1 and the DNS server. My preferred IPv4 DNS server is 192.168.0.1. So it is the preferred server for itself. So when it's actually trying to resolve queries, it's going to be looking to this address. The way that we'll see that is through a tool called NSLookup. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in NSLookup, and I'm going to say, hey, I want to look up a machine called DNSbacon.bacon.com. That's the fully qualified domain name of this server. And if I hit enter, it's going to resolve that with the answer in the record. Now, notice what happened here. The first thing that I can see is that it looked for actually the IPv6 address, which I can see is actually right there. It is one of my stipulated servers. And it took just a second, but it did return the record. So, well, I'll explain this part in a second, but what happened here is that I did a successful lookup. Excellent. Now let's recraft our lookup a little bit. What I want to do here is I don't want this server to respond. What I want is I want this server to respond. Even though you and I both know it's the same server, the computer doesn't. I want the IPv4 version or the IPv4 address to be the resolution for this. So the way I'm going to do that, I'm just going to do a little bit of an up arrow here. And this time I'm going to append this request with the name of the server, 0.1. So what I'm actually saying now is I want my NSLookup to look for dnsbacon.bacon.com, and the server that I want to respond to the answer, the server that I want to give the query is 192.168.0.1. I'm going to hit enter, and there we go. The server that responded was now my IPv4 version of the server. Now, look, I got this unknown here. I wonder why that is. We'll figure that out in a second. But it did resolve the information contained in this A record. Now, as you can see, I'm running both IPv4 and IPv6. So I could add the IPv6 version of this, the forward lookup. And I can do that by doing a right click here, adding a new host. Now, this is a quad A record. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in this DNS-bacon.com. And I'm going to add the IP address according to my topology right here. This is going to be 2002:ACDC:1 on a /64. So it is going to be 2002:ACDC:1. Hit add host. Away we go. And we are done. Now you'll see that I have an A record and a quad A record. Let's go back and run that NSLookup again. Let's see what I get. Look at that. Now I have two addresses. So not only did the query respond with the IPv4 address, but now I've got the IPv6 address. So both of these records showed up in my NSLookup. Fantastic. We're rocking with fire. I want to fix this unknown thing. Look at this. This is still driving me crazy. Why is that? Okay, well, here's the reason. I've asked the server to use one of these addresses. And the problem is the server says, okay, I need an answer to this query. I need to resolve the question, who is, or what is the IP address for the machine called DNS-bacon.bacon.com. The section here of this response is clarifying the server that's responding with the information. Now, it says, I absolutely know the IPv4 address of the server, but I don't know the name of it. The reason it doesn't know the name of it is it has no information to take an IP address and convert that or translate it or resolve it to a fully qualified domain name. So let's fix that problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my reverse lookup zone and I'm going to create a new zone. The reverse lookup zones give me records that let me take an IP address and find the name of a machine. I'm going to right click, create a new zone, and I'm going to follow the wizard again. Let's create a primary zone. And this is going to be IPv4. We're going to have to do this twice because you can see IPv6 is going to be handled differently. I'm going to click IPv4, click next, and now I get a chance to enter the network ID. Now this is the network portion of the namespace that this zone will be the authoritative source for. Now my network ID is a /24, and this happens to be a 192.168.0 network. I'm going to hit next. And there's the file that's created. Look at it's backwards because it's technically reading the fully qualified domain and the network right to left is what's going on there. I'm going to accept the default name. I'm going to hit next. Again, it gives me a chance to decide whether I'm going to allow these records to be dynamically updated, meaning automatically updated. Again, because this is a standalone server, I can't validate the sources. I'm going to keep this as a manual process. I'm not going to allow dynamic updates. I'm going to hit next. My wizard finishes, and now you can see I have a new reverse lookup zone. And look at this. It created new records, an SOA record, and it created a name server. Now again, I have that same problem that I had before. So this is why it's really important to validate these records. I see that the name server is not resolved. I'm going to click on the edit button and I'm going to ask the server to resolve itself. And it finds that it has both an IPv4 and an IPv6 address. Excellent. I'm going to click apply, close, and you'll see now I can add pointer records. I have different options. If I go under the forward lookup zone here and I right click, look at the options I have here. So all of these are different style of records and you can look those up and see what those records do. Right now, I'm only trying to do A records, quad A records, and pointer records. No, there's no pointer record here because a pointer record goes number to name or IP address to fully qualified domain name. An A record goes fully qualified domain name to an IP address. I've got two records in there. I'm going to go to my reverse lookup zone. I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new pointer record. Okay, there we go. It says, what's the IP address of this host? Well, I'm going to build a record for the server. The IP address is .1, 192.168.0.1, and the name of this host, I can actually browse for it. I can actually go into my forward lookup and I can find there's the record right there. That's the record in my forward lookup zone. I can actually select so there's no chance of me mistyping it. And now you can see I have both a forward and a reverse record for my server called DNS-bacon.bacon.com. Let's verify that in NSLookup. I'm going to click back here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same lookup. Just do the same lookup and I'm going to see look what's changed. So you can see right out of the gate, something cool has been fixed. So the NSLookup, the server was now able to resolve. It was able to say, I'm sending a query to this server, which is 192.168.0.1. I wonder who that server is. If there's a pointer record for it, I could take the number and I can find the fully qualified domain name of this. In which case, the FQDN, the fully qualified domain name, is DNS-bacon.bacon.com. We got that from right here, this pointer record. And now I could do the same thing for IPv6. Only let's watch the problem here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to NSLookup, and I'm going to look for a forward lookup of dns-bacon.bacon.com. I want to ask it on the IPv6 address. ACDC::1. Let's see what happens there. And I'm going to hit enter. I might get a little bit of a timeout there. Oh, but it did give me the answer. So again, I was successful in obtaining the records. Okay, my lookup is working. But again, I got this unknown. Reason being is that my server said, I asked the server that lives at 2002:ACDC::1. It gave me answers. However, I don't know the name of that server because I was unable to resolve it. However, we can fix that the same way we did with IPv4. I'm going to right click, new zone, and I'm going to click on another primary zone. This time, guess what? An IPv6 reverse lookup zone. So now everybody, I've got 2 lookup zones for reverse. I've got 1 primary forward and I've got 2 primary reverse. What's my prefix? My prefix is 2002:ACDC:/64. That's the network address with the prefix. I'm going to hit next. I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to go, let's create an IPv6 rev look. Excellent. Click OK. I'm not going to allow dynamic updates. Let's hit finish. There's my file right there. And I'm going to now go back to my bacon.com. Let's right click, select properties. I'm going to update my record right here. Click update, apply. I'm going to go back. Notice how it took that command, because if I go back here and I do a little bit of a refresh right here, there's my record. Let me go back here and just validate my SOA. You can see how this typically is a pain in the butt. I'm going to go to my name server, hit edit, resolve. There's my addresses. My record is validated. I'm going to click apply, hit OK, and away I go. Now watch this. If I go back here and I'm going to hit my NSLookup DNS-bacon.com, I'm going to do the same thing again. And there is my successful lookup right there. You see it's validated. Okay, now what have I done? Let's unpack this. I have created 3 primary zones. The first primary zone was a forward lookup zone that contains both A records and quad A records. It lets me translate the name of a server or a machine, a fully qualified domain name, to an IP address, both IPv4 and IPv6. I then created 2 separate and distinct reverse lookup zones. The first one was IPv4. It contained the associated PTR or pointer records with IPv4 addresses, and I created a IPv6 forward primary lookup zone for quad A records that live in my forward lookup zone. Excellent. So I validated this through NSLookup. Let's do one last thing and validate with my Windows 10 client. Okay, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to, let's minimize this and go to my Windows 10 PC. Now, I'm going to go back to my command line. Let's take a look here, and I'm going to do a quick little ipconfig. Let's type that in properly, please, and /all. And there we go. Let's take a quick look here. You see that I have preset, when I set this machine up, I set it up to have 2 DNS servers, IPv4 and IPv6. And these I've already confirmed my connectivity to that server. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask the server to do an NSLookup. Let's get in there, NSLookup, and let's look up the server called DNS-bacon. There we go, .bacon.com. You see what I've done? I've typed in the fully qualified domain name, and the server that I want to respond, I'd like it to be 192.168.0.1. That's the address of the server that I want to have the response from. And I got the same successful lookup that I did when I was on the command line of the server. Fantastic. What about this machine though? Okay, this machine is called PC01. What if I did a lookup for myself? What I want to do is I want to find out, am I on here as a PC? Let's type in PC01, hit enter, and it says no, I cannot find you. I do not have a record. So the server called DNS Bacon at .bacon.com at this address could not find a record that said I have an IP address for this machine called PC 0.1. Now, what I'm going to do though is I'm going to go back in. What if I fix the, let's see if I can do this here. Let's look up the fully qualified name, bacon.com. Maybe that's it. Nope, same problem. Well, this is the reason is that we don't actually have a record here. Let's go back to the server and let's add a record for PC01, and that problem's going to go away. Let's bring up my DNS again. I'm going to go to my forward lookup, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to create a new A file, PC01, and you can see that it's already adding the correct namespace for my fully qualified domain name. And the IP address for this is 192.168.0.10. Let's go back here, 192.168.0.10. And now, because the reverse zone is already created, if I have this checkbox enabled, when I add the host, it's going to create not only my forward lookup, but my revert. Let me refresh. There it is, my reverse lookup. And so now if I go back here and I say, do you know the computer? So if I say to, hey, Mr. Server, who lives at 192.168.0.1, do you know the address, the IP address of the computer called PC01.bacon.com? And the answer is yes, I do. See, so I can see now I have successfully looked up the A record. What about the quad A record? What about the IPv6? Well, this computer has an address, which is 2002 ACDC::10. Let's go add that record in there as well. I'm going to go to bacon.com, forward lookup, right click, add a quad A record, PC01, and the IP address is 2002 ACDC::10. I'm going to ensure that this is checked off because it does have a reverse lookup zone ready for us to go. I'm going to hit add host. And not only did it create the quad A record, if I pop it down here and I do a little refresh in this reverse lookup zone, you'll see that it has the IPv6 address for PC01.bacon.com. I'm going to go back to my PC and let's do another lookup here. And I'm going to hit enter. And now you can see that I have both addresses resolved from this server. And I can ask not only it on the IPv4, but I can ask for it on the IPv6, 2002 ACDC::1. That's the IP address of my DNS server. And when I ask it on that address, I get equally a good result. Now, guess what? Because I've got forward and reverse lookup zones for my machine, I can actually say, I would like, not necessarily the address, but I could say, please give me the IPv4 and IPv6 address for the machine called PC01.bacon.com. And the server I'd like to respond is DNS-bacon.bacon.com. Hit enter, and that works as well. So now I can resolve based on either the IP address or the FQDN of the server. So what I've now been able to do was create a completely standalone authoritative zone full of records that will resolve name to IP and IP to name of all the machines on my network. Now, we got lots more to do. Hopefully that came together for you as nicely as it did for me. We've got lots of other videos in the series. Take a boo through some of these other LAN management fundamentals. Hopefully that helps out. See you again soon.